like a waving flag. So wave your flag, now wave your flag, now wave your flag. Oh, born to a throne, stronger than Rome, but violent prone, all people's own, but it's my home, all I have known, where I got.
Welcome to the SoccerIQ podcast. My name is Ellis Riley, and tonight I've pinched a little bit of Jack Hartley's time to sit down with me and have a quick chat. We're going to have a little discussion here about how the recruiting process can be quite a confusing one and a long one for parents and players alike, and just going to share a bit of experience and insight from a college coaching and a club coaching perspective on how we feel that we can maybe help educate these players and parents a little bit more in advance to give these families the greatest opportunity. You know, we're looking between kind of the 15 to the 19 bracket. Those players who are getting closer to the end of the high school days and evidently show the motivation and desire that they want to play at the next level. And we're just going to have a little discussion on, you know, how can clubs, in your opinion, Jack, how can the youth clubs help prepare these kids from a college standpoint? Obviously, you're a coach and you do a lot of recruiting here, there, and everywhere. So in your opinion, what do you think's maybe lacking from kids who you maybe talk to that you suddenly see they don't have a knowledge of or they're not aware of? Anything in particular that stands out for you?
Well, I mean, I'm in a bit of a unique situation in the sense that I'm an assistant coach at an NAIA school, so I'm sure you can test that as well. That I feel like a lot of recruits are very uneducated about the NAIA specifically. You know, you get so many recruits that say that you lose so many recruits just because you don't have that NCAA label. And then, you know, you try and tell them, you try and educate them a little bit as to the rules and the differences and that the level is not necessarily that much different. Obviously, you've got your big powerhouse D1 schools and even within D2, you're familiar with the Wingate program in North Carolina, the women's program there, the men's programs there are pretty successful and could compete with a lot of D1 schools. But so could we. We play a few D1, D2 schools throughout the season in scrimmages, exhibition games, and we compete and often win. So, you know, it's hard to break that stigma of the NAIA with those recruits. And I think that is the club as well, because the NCAA label is so appealing for kids. I think the clubs then just ride that and to draw numbers into their clubs as well. You know, they promise that they can get them into an NCAA school, or that's at least the mission of the club, of the team, that they want to gear people towards NCAA. So we do tend to lose a lot of recruits on that front.
Do you think? Sorry, quick question from me then. In that, do you think that's a direct result of potentially just the media influence that outside of soccer, for example, football, basketball, baseball,
absolutely,
sports that are on TV in front of our faces day to day, and not necessarily soccer, is it? But it's all NCAA.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the halo effect, as I've learned through my graduate program. You know, one aspect of something that is successful or appealing then means that every other aspect of it is also as appealing or equally as successful.
Yeah.
You know, just because the coverage and
the
money that's in football, basketball, not so much baseball. I don't tend to see as much baseball on TV, but it is still there. You know, and especially the media coverage of athletes going in the draft for the NFL and the NBA, they're all linked with the big D1 schools at the NCAA level. And although there are many NAIA athletes that do get drafted, a few in particular, one in particular I remember. You remember the guy who used to play for Davenport, went to Philadelphia Union right away. I'm not sure where he's at now. And there's many that have followed in his footsteps or gone before him. So I think that is underplayed as well. Yeah. The media access that the NCAA have and the money going into the televising of all these events, you know, it's kind of a bit of a brainwash for so many people that, I mean, even if parents are big football fans or big basketball fans and they watch March Madness or they're watching the college championship game in football, it rubs off on their kids. You know, if dad's watching it in the front room, then their son or daughter is going to probably be in the house and aware of it, even if they're not necessarily watching it. They're just, people are constantly talking about it, and it's just covered so much more than the NAIA. So I would definitely.
That's a good point.
Deal.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think what you've just said there hit the nail on the head with the parents maybe just watching it in the living room, but it kind of feeds right into the kids and as players, and they don't really get exposed to a larger gradient. And I think another thing maybe to consider, I'm not sure, and again, this is something I'd have to look on, but I believe NAIA is an organ in comparison to the NCAA. And so with that heritage in mind, I think that also maybe has a factor. A lot of people are just very NCAA because of its roots and where it started and everything that's come before us. And I think the NAIA kind of goes under the radar a little bit, maybe because it is smaller organizations, and also because of its, I think it's a little bit newer within the college sport realm as an association.
Yeah, for sure. And I think because of those earlier beginnings with the NCAA, I would, again, I'm not really sure on this. I'm going to assume that the NCAA as a whole has more money than the NAIA right now. Yeah. And you know, we see all the rule changes with eligibility and training rules and stuff, and I feel like it's NAIA versus the NCAA at times. You know, NCAA recently, I can't remember whether it was at the D2 level or D1 level, recently changed their bylaws so that they no longer recognise an NAIA letter of intent.
Well, it's just, yeah, and I've just looked it up real quick, actually, just so we can share. NCAA was founded in 1906 and NAIA was 1940. So there's a 34-year gap difference there. If that's anything to go by, maybe potentially the NAIA would, in 34 years from now, maybe it's a little closer to where potentially it could be in terms of the exposure it gets for soccer players specifically. You know,
yeah, it's definitely come a long way. I mean, since we've been out here, we played at NAIA level, and it has got a lot bigger. There's more media coverage, not necessarily TV wise, but the amount of schools that are streaming stuff. The national championship, national tournament is broadcasted as well. So I think things are coming along the right way. It's just, I think it's a constant competition. It's like competitive business competitors, you know, Nike versus Adidas kind of thing, NCAA versus NAIA. Who's going to be bigger? Who's going to attract the most fans, the most media coverage? Who's going to generate the most money, essentially? And I don't think that's necessarily the best thing for kids looking to go to college, because how are they supposed to make the right decision when they're being brainwashed just as somebody would if they're marketing a product?
So do you think the kids are being, when you talk about being brainwashed potentially there, I think there's no argument right now that the NCAA is, in terms of, I think you said it, but I think if we're honest, I think the reality is the NCAA, just on the fact that it has 3 divisions of sports, etc., it probably pulls a lot more money and has a lot more people involved in it as a member of that association. I think it has a lot more members of it, the NCAA. In terms of not just schools, but as individual athletes as well. So when you say brainwash, do you think it's maybe just coming from the whole media presence and obviously everything we've just discussed, or do you think it's just the fact that the NAIA, going specifically here on the soccer side, do you think that the club level and at preparatory level, when we're trying to help educate these kids on the college game and how to prepare for entering it, do you think the NAIA is just getting a little neglected by a lot of clubs and coaches maybe?
I think it's all interconnected, if I'm honest. I think that the business side of the NCAA, they have people that know exactly what they're doing, just as big businesses around the country, around the world, know exactly how to reach people with, you know, their marketing campaigns, the way they present themselves. And I think that then leads to the clubs, and it goes both ways. I think, like I said earlier, I think the clubs are then playing off that popularity of the NCAA to then attract players into their clubs. You know, if they can guarantee an NCAA spot, or at least say that that's what we're working for, I think that's way more appealing. Now, I think things are getting better. When I speak to recruits now, you know, you give them a little educational speech and give them the facts that we can also offer you a great education and a great successful soccer experience. The level is not necessarily going to drop in coaching or academics. It's just, you know, different things, the size of the schools, the amount of sports that are offered, the amount of scholarships that are offered, to name a few. I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into it, but I think the NAIA is definitely neglected, but I think it's all interrelated, and it's all about business, politics. That, you know, it's a much bigger picture than we can even fathom, I think.
Yeah, no, I would agree on that. There's a lot of logistics behind the scenes that, you know, personally, I don't really know if I care to divulge into too much.
Me either.
One thing I would say is from my perspective, when I was at club down in Florida, this is nothing against you know where I worked. It was a great experience. It's just I realized that we didn't have a college education program, and just something I picked up on while I was there. And the club was going through some changes, and I thought, well, you know, we do still have quite a lot of kids who are, you know, 16 to 18 years old playing within the system here, and there's some talent that could certainly be getting offered scholarships to go play at the next level. And I thought we need to do something about it. What can we do to address it quickly? And a lot of clubs do this, which is fantastic. And we just, you know, I just said, well, let's have a college education night. And we put a presentation together, and we had a full house. The room was quite small, but we packed it up with about 40 people and parents and kids, and who just wanted to come and learn and understand the process, because ultimately they wanted to know more. And I'm not sure how many we expected to come or how many the club expected to come, but I think it showed when we filled the room that there was actually more interest than we probably saw day to day on the fields, because you don't really talk about it as much while you're at work and while the kids are training. But you know, I'm sure there was probably a lot of discussion at home from kids and parents, but I just don't know if anybody really came forward and thought, maybe we should ask at the club, you know, if they can do this. So we just kind of took it upon ourselves, myself and another colleague, and we ran this college education night. Went brilliantly well. We shared lots of great information. Myself personally from an NAIA and NCAA perspective, my colleague very much more from an NCAA perspective. Went fantastically well, but the big thing that struck me was just how many of the kids who were sat in the room. I threw the question out there right away. I said, how many associations and divisions can you get a scholarship at? And the first thing that everybody knew was Division 1, and then a couple of Division 2s murmured out there, and somebody said Division 3, and I said, well, you know, that's when we explained that Division 3 is a little bit different with the structure of scholarships and awards, but nobody said NAIA. And so after we kind of digressed the NCAA side of it, we saw it as a great opportunity to open up the NAIA side and just say, hey, the facts and figures are, and thankfully we'd put all this on a PowerPoint, but we pulled it up. There's 200 plus teams here that could be an option for one of you out there.
Right.
And the kids' eyes all just suddenly, you know, it was kind of like deer in headlights, the way they were looking at you and the screen, because they thought, hang on a minute, you're telling me that there's another 200 potential schools that might want to give me money to keep playing soccer. And it was great. It was very humbling to see, but it was such an eye-opener for me, because I thought, you know, surely this can't just be here where these kids are a little uneducated of the potential opportunities that are maybe in front of them. Great. And we've had a few little, if you like, fairy tale stories come from that. You know, I know there was one of the boys on the older teams. went to a showcase in St. Louis, and he got picked up by a small town school in Arkansas. That's an NAIA program, and he would have never have imagined it in his wildest dreams that he would have ended up thinking that was the right fit for him. But that's just one of a couple of stories that panned out that way. But it's great because ultimately that just proves that if we can educate the kids and the parents, these opportunities, and they won't come along for everyone, but if we can find the extra one or two, every little helps, and it's fantastic for the kids because they've got an opportunity here that they probably would have never been able to expose themselves to.
Absolutely. I've had a few parents approach me when I've been at showcases, and they've said, like, where do we even begin? Like, I see you're a college coach walking around watching games, but they ask me questions like, at what age are you starting to look? What are you looking for? How much money is usually available? Like, it's a blanket statement, every school has this much money to give.
Right.
And like you said, I think there does need to be more. And I don't think the academies and the ECNL and the elite clubs really have this issue because they've probably all got college coordinators.
Yeah.
I think it tends to be the smaller clubs, maybe in parts of the country that maybe aren't as soccer mad. And I think that, there really isn't much out there unless there's people like yourself willing to just do it. People who don't assume, who just say, hey, let's give it a go, see what they know. And that there really isn't that many people doing out there that I am aware of. So I think that was a really good idea.
Yeah, like I say, it was just something that we noticed we could probably implement, and it obviously we've had a few great stories come from it, which was fantastic. But I just think that if what you've just said there really hit home, parents coming up to you asking how do we go about this? Hello, are you a coach? Are we allowed to speak to you? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
That not that it is awkward. I mean, it may be more awkward for the parent than yourself, but and even for myself when I'm out recruiting. But that just tells me, from what you said there, that we can definitely be doing so much more to educate not just the kid but the parents, because while the kids are playing, some of these parents may want to at least be trying to find some information and gather some potential contact details from college coaches while their son or daughter are playing, because the parents are traveling with them. A lot of the parents follow the kids on these journeys. It's a mutual journey that you tend to do together, the recruiting process, hopefully with your family and the player. And I think if we can educate the family and the parents as well, it can help so much more, and it can really ease the parents' mindset, for one, because I think we would all joke, but it's true, the parents would worry more than the player when it comes to the whole recruiting process. I think that's definitely a fact. I think that the players, 18-year-old, 17-year-old kids these days, they're very much happy-go-lucky in some mindsets, whereas the parents they're the ones who need to know, and rightfully so. They need to know the nitty-gritty details of what's to come and what potentially is on offer. So that hits home with me. I think, can we educate the parents better in even the basics? Yeah, of course you can go speak to the college coaches. Go approach them, introduce yourself, say hello, come sit down next to us, tell us about your son or daughter, tell us about yourselves, ask us some questions about our background and what we're looking for and how we got to where we are. I think building them relationships is massively important.
Do you think every coach should be that approachable, though?
Yes, I do. I personally do, and that's maybe just my personality type. But I think we live in a world now where to grow as a person in your profession, you've got to be willing to share your own experiences, network, express yourself, accept and demand feedback, whether it's positive or negative. And I think from your point there, I think 100%, every coach should be willing to take that couple of minutes. If and if you're watching a game and you've got a couple of recruits who you're really dead set on trying to see and get some, you're a little unsure of, and you're trying to make your notes, that's a little different. But when you're kind of floating around the field and there's not much going on, 100%. I mean, I personally, I like to try and walk around and meet people and have a chat with other coaches, have a chat with parents who are there, and especially parents who are on the sidelines of the games that I'm watching. I sometimes like to just kind of float in between and introduce myself. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it, really. I think you just got to be a little bit open-minded.
I totally agree with you. And I'm exactly the same way when I'm out and around the fields. My question was, do you think other coaches are like that or would be like that? I agree with you that 100% they should be like that. Do you think everyone is like that?
No, I'm going to make a point here, and obviously I'm not going to no names, no anything like that, but I think there's a general consensus that some coaches who maybe are at much bigger tend to be a little less approachable than the ones at the smaller schools. And right. I don't think there's anything controversial about that in itself, because I think the fact and the reality is that these coaches at the bigger schools are probably quite swamped with information, with approaches, probably a little more so than people like we are at smaller colleges.
And they're probably more selective as well, I'd say. So they're at that game watching one particular player.
Yes, very selective as well. I would agree with that. That's a good point. And so I think, going off your question that you've asked, yes, I think some coaches are less approachable, but there's reasons why, and I don't think they mean it or ever. I don't think it's meant to come off in a arrogant way, and I don't think it does most of the time. I don't think it does. Maybe occasionally it can, but the reality is that the smaller schools, coaches like ourselves, I think we're naturally. It's better for us to be a little more open-minded and willing to kind of sit down and be a bit more of an open book in terms of discussing and expressing conversations with parents and players.
Absolutely.